Exes come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. Ex-girlfriends, ex-boyfriends, ex-friends. All too often do our relationships destruct and leave massive rifts or just flames of anger and regret. Now, let's begin. This is a story about my insane ex who stalked me. At the time of the story, I was 19 and had just graduated high school. My junior year, I went through a wannabe redneck phase and used to party and drink a lot to fit in. It was an embarrassing phase, but because of it, I met the girl I thought was my soulmate. I was so wrong, though. At the end of my junior year, my friend invited me to a massive field party. He himself would be throwing it. I pulled into the field that night in my truck, and I started to drink. Before I knew it, I was 10 beers deep, and honestly, I forgot where I was. I remember thinking about how much I hated the music that was playing. I think it was Luke Bryan. I was getting mad, getting ready to walk up and smash whichever stereo was playing that crappy music when she walked up to me. She tapped on the door of my truck and asked if I was there with anyone. I told her, "Nah, it's just me." She looked familiar, but I couldn't quite put my finger on how I knew her. She asked if she could sit with me, and I said yes. She climbed into my truck and sat down next to me. I asked her what her name was. I admitted that she looked familiar. She responded and told me that we went to the same school. She said she was a grade below me. To shorten the story, I was drunk, she was drunk, things happened, and the next thing I knew, we were a couple. That next morning, I woke up in the cab of my truck and saw her just staring at me. I asked what happened, and she told me everything. We went on several dates after that. Things went well. Toward the end of the next summer, all of my friends had abandoned me then, and I became a sort of edgy outcast. I went from one phase to another, I mean full-on wearing a trench coat every day kind of edgy. Aside from having fewer friends, nothing really changed. The first week of the next school year went by normally. One Friday night, I went to see my girlfriend. Her parents weren't home, but I was eager to see her. I knocked on her door, but I didn't receive an answer. I then noticed a bicycle along the side of her garage. I recognized it. It belonged to this creepy 30-something-year-old loser who sells weed. Immediately, I was worried. She had shown me where her parents kept the spare key. I was to use it in case of an emergency. And as I didn't trust that sketchy guy, I decided to use it. I walked in and immediately was hit with the smell of weed. I had a bad feeling right then. I already knew what I was going to see. She was sleeping with him in exchange for weed. I didn't even know she smoked weed. I ended up getting into a fight with the guy. After that, I told her never to speak to me again. After that dramatic incident, I thought the two of us were done. That's the way I wanted it. I didn't want anything to do with her anymore. Fast forward 2 weeks, I hadn't seen her around at school, and I hadn't received any texts or phone calls. I was sure it was as over as I thought. But as I couldn't get her off my mind as easily as I thought I could, I called up one of my closest friends and asked if he wanted to go for some target practice at his family's property. He obliged, so I grabbed my rifle and began to head over to his place, radio blaring as I drove through town. At one point, I looked into my rearview mirror and I could see some headlights behind me. I thought, no big deal. I got about halfway there. I must have been out of town at that point for about 15 minutes. When I decided to stop at a mom-and-pop gas station on the way there to grab a pack of cigarettes and a Monster, I walked into the gas station, got what I wanted, and walked out. I've been noticed on the far end of the parking lot, a blue Mustang, just like my ex's. I didn't pay much mind to it. There were plenty of blue Mustangs around here. I turned on my truck, but at that same moment, the Mustang turned on as well. I pulled out of the parking lot, and that car followed me. It followed me until I pulled into my buddy's driveway, and as I drove down the long driveway, I saw it turn around and drive by 3 more times. I was getting worried at this point. I told my buddy about it. He said to me, "Well, we'll just keep an eye out for it." Honestly, I did feel a bit better because we had some rifles. We walked outside of his cabin and out to his homemade shooting range, complete with concrete retaining wall. I started letting loose with my rifle. Once I was running low on ammo, we both suddenly heard a vehicle coming down the driveway at a high speed. I asked if he invited anyone, and he shook his head. We assumed maybe it was his parents coming home, so we ignored it for a moment and kept on going. When we were ready to head back and things got quiet, I began to hear a familiar voice whispering to me, but it was a bit too distant to make out what it was saying. My buddy looked at me and said, "We should probably get back to the cabin now." I agreed. We grabbed the rifles and hiked to the cabin in his woods. We got back and powered on the generator on the back porch, and we began to settle in, when suddenly something smacked against the front door. We both jumped, looked at each other, and then went to investigate. My friend was closer to the door. When he looked outside before I did, he said without turning, "So, you might want to go hide upstairs or something." I chuckled and asked why. He then looked at me, dead in the eye, with a serious face and said, "I think your ex is outside, and she's got a knife." I thought he was kidding me, so I promptly responded with another chuckle. I told him, "Stop it, dude, don't bullcrap me." But he shook his head and said he was serious. Then we heard someone outside screaming. I opened the curtains to the front window, and sure enough, she was standing out there, holding a large kitchen knife. She was singing that same crappy Luke Bryan song from the night we met. I was angry and a little bit creeped out. I swung the door open and screamed at her to leave, and when I did, she charged right at me. My buddy yanked me back inside and slammed the door shut, locking it. I was in shock. I sat there on the floor. My friend said he'd call 911, but neither of us had our cell phones. Then I heard her outside screaming the lyrics to that song. Eventually, we realized that there were two of us and one of her, and we had rifles. So we grabbed the rifles, readied them, and then pushed the door open. But she was gone now. We made the walk back to his house without incident, completely on edge the entire time. Once we got to the driveway, sure enough, her blue Mustang sat behind my truck, blocking it in the driveway. I also noticed that all 4 of my tires had been slashed, but she was nowhere to be seen. We finally had our phones again, so we called 911. They found that girl hiding in a neighbor's goat barn. Apparently, she had been doing some very hard substances, and she was sent to jail. Luckily for me, I haven't seen her since that night, and I never want to again. Story number 2. I'm still young, but most of all, my relationships have been abusive in some way. This is not the story of my worst relationship, but the story of my strangest. I was 16 years old, and I had a very pronounced figure for that age, which got me a lot of unwanted attention from my male peers. I was tired of it, honestly, tired of teen boys. So I decided if I were going to have a boyfriend, it would be with someone older than me. I met a boy from my school who was tall and attractive, quiet, but not to the point he seemed creepy. He was 2 years older than me, mature, funny, someone who seemed to be a wonderful guy. He was good friends with my neighbor who was a party girl. They were very much into substances, but I didn't know that at the time. I saw him all the time since he was always a houseover, as he frequently visited a neighbor of mine named Lily. I often went on walks around town with Lily. And the boy in question, who I'll call Guy for this story, would come along with us. Guy was very different from how he acted in school. He was loud and perverted and drank a lot in person. I was his friend for maybe 5 months. During this time, I had a huge crush on him. He always called me pretty and said how I was so different from other girls. And despite the attention I got back then, I was insecure and I fell for those compliments. We eventually kissed, and that's where everything became more real. We were an item, and he was very public about it. For the first 2 months, it was great. He took me out on dates, bought me gifts, showered me with affection, and constantly told me how I was his forever, how much he loved me. Honestly, I was struck. It was the first time I'd been treated this way by another person, and I fell hard. Soon summer came about, and Guy began to show his true colors. It was our 4-month-anniversary, you could say. He picked me up in his truck and took me out, telling me it was a surprise. But the surprise was apparently a house party. Now, I'm not a party person. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I hate loud music, and large crowds suck the energy right out of me. He knew this. When he parked, he told me, "Lighten up for a change and have some fun. Stop being so boring." And then he referred to me as a female dog, for whatever reason. It was the first time he'd ever said anything that negative to me. Sure, we'd had a couple of arguments, but I wasn't about to have another terrible relationship. Then again, I was really into him. So even though I was hurt, I brushed it off and walked into the first party I've ever been to. To sum up the entire event, I was having a terrible time. Random guys kept hitting on me and touching me, and I just wanted to go home. But the only way for that to happen was to find Guy. I asked around, and a few people said he was upstairs. I walked upstairs, calling out for Guy, but I wasn't the only one calling out his name. My neighbor was as well. Though she wasn't trying to find him, she was doing it with him. I just stared on, had no idea what to say. Guy ran after me, but instead of trying to come up with an excuse or apologize, he kept down-talking me, blaming me, telling me that because I wasn't doing things like that with him, it was my fault, and he had to find someone that would. I left him on the spot. I was crying when I called a good friend of mine who drove me home. The next morning, he kept calling me and texting me, trying to apologize. He drove to my house where I kindly handed him back the gifts he had bought me, and that made him mad. He threw everything down and called me many profanities and stormed off. I heard from him for about 5 weeks when the news came around that Lily was pregnant, with none other than Guy's baby. So Guy moved in with Lily. Good for him, but that meant that for the next 7 months, he harassed me as he lived so close to me. On one occasion, he broke in through my window. I'm not sure if he was trying to find me, but I wasn't there at the time. Instead of finding me, he stole some things of mine. He even attacked my brother, and they got into a fight. He tried to steal my dog. He tried to manipulate my friends and get them to turn against me. He threw alcohol bottles all over my lawn. We'd had enough and called the cops on him. I'll never forget the day he came out in handcuffs. The whole time I was dating him, and the 7 months he was there, he was apparently selling different substances. When he was caught, he was sentenced to 10 years. 2 weeks later, Lily had the baby. But I know it wasn't Guy's because Guy had a different shade of skin entirely. Story number 3. I recently got married. It's wonderful, but the road to getting there was really bumpy. Before getting into it, here are some details. I'm 25 and my husband is 26. He is a pre-T and pre-surgery trans man. Before meeting me, he, let's say, got around. He broke a few hearts along the way, and there are a number of angry women in his past, but one in particular sticks out. He and this girl had been hooking up. They never actually dated when he met me. We were friends at first, but it became pretty clear to everyone but us for a while that we were crazy about each other. But that girl could not stand me. We eventually began dating, and he called things off with the girl. Cue incessant stalking. She called him 30 times a day, as well as emails and texts, messages saying she needed him and all that. So I was at his place one weekend when his cell phone starts ringing off the hook. It's her. I was tired and hungover at the time, so I groggily switch his phone off. He tells me she'll come to the house if she can't get through on the phone, so I shrug it off and go back to sleep, thinking my would-be husband is more trouble than he's worth. Not 20 minutes later, his dog starts going bananas. Someone's in the front yard, and you guessed it, it was her. She starts banging on the front door and screaming. He turns his phone on, only to be met with even more frantic phone calls from her. He yells from inside to her, saying he's going to call the cops if she doesn't leave. But she's going on and on about something. I swear she said something along the lines of, "We're going to go have brunch together, go get some drinks, talk about how we're going to work this out." Then she starts talking about where I'm going to sleep tonight, because it's going to be her and him in our bed instead of us. The two of us are dumbfounded by this. He tells her again to get lost. He ignores her calls to call the cops. At this point, she's banging on the bedroom window. This was weird, because he had moved his bedroom from one room to another, and she hadn't been inside the house since then, so how did she know that was our room now? You also have to climb through ramble bushes to reach the window. Eventually, a police car pulls up the driveway, and she takes off. A few months go by, and my boyfriend and I are getting serious about one another. In general, we're really happy. Her stalking is still going on, but we kind of just brush it off at this point. She doesn't come to the house anymore, just calls and emails. an example of which read, "Please can we talk?" You can share him with me if you like. I'll just be a side thing. No one has to know. This girl was genuinely unstable. One weekend I was home, about 2 hours from my boyfriend's place, and he calls me saying there's been a break-in. Nothing was stolen, the person was gone, but they had cut themselves on the window and gotten blood everywhere. I was horrified, but he was calm about it. The police came and took statements, and that was pretty much the end of it. Until 2 weeks later, there's another broken window. This time my boyfriend's dog jumped out the broken window to chase off the person, and she hurt her paw. My boyfriend lived in a not-so-great area, but he's close to his neighbors, and he has a massive, scary-looking pit bull mix who'll bark at passing cars and people, never mind someone trying to break in. Neither of us could imagine seeing that dog and hearing that bark and still wanting to go into the house, unless you know the dog. She's a big softie if you get to know her, and wouldn't hurt a fly. This is how the two of us were convinced it was her, because had a stranger broken in, there would have been more blood. At this point, she began stalking me, popping up on all my social media. I was getting calls at all hours of the night, only to hear a giggling or breathing, and then the other person would hang up. I get friend requests on Facebook from her friends saying, "Hey, she and I aren't friends anymore, and I wanted to get to know you since your boyfriend is such a good friend to us." But I didn't believe those comments for a second. My boyfriend received the same requests and messages from her so-called friends. It was funny at first, but it was beginning to take its toll on us. I didn't feel he was doing enough to stop this. He thought I was overreacting, so we argued about it often. Then one weekend I was with my boyfriend for the first time in a while since work had kept us both pretty tied up. We were at his place and decided to have some us time, if you catch my drift. He walked off to get a certain toy from our drawer. He came back to the couch looking like he'd seen a ghost. When I asked what was wrong, he held up a pocket Bible and a Post-it note. The Bible was not ours, and the note read, "Make good choices." This was confusing and creepy as hell. He said it was in his drawer where he kept 2 toys, one of which he personally bought just for me, but that one was missing. I know it sounds funny, but I was mortified. How had she gotten in? Was it actually her who did the break-ins? How did she know which one he and I used exclusively, again with the bedroom being moved? He immediately threatened her with a restraining order, but we felt as if we couldn't prove a darned thing without sounding crazy. She went quiet from there. Later on, the two of us got married and moved on with our lives, though from time to time she still sends him pleading emails every few weeks. But nothing else scary has happened. But if I ever see her in person, I'll try my best to get a message across that she needs to leave us alone. Story number 4. Before I explain my story, I should let you know how I was put in such an interesting position. I was in the 6th grade. For years I had been bullied by my siblings, and my eldest sibling moved away. Being the middle child, I was cast aside. My youngest sibling was sickly and accident-prone. So being a well-behaved, good health, and does well in school kid, I wasn't my parents' biggest concern. I'm still not. I also didn't have the best of friends at the time. They swore, they smoked weed, they were always talking about something perverted. Anyway, on to the story. One of my close friends was moving, so in order to keep touch, I added him on a messaging app called Kik. I've got a lot of weird stories about that app, but that's for another time. So me and my friend group all joined the same message group so we could talk to each other. This was going well until 7th grade. In 7th grade, I moved schools and lost touch with the 6 friends I had. I fell deeper into a depression. Then my friend who moved away texted me on Kik. He added me to a group chat which had his girlfriend on it, one of his new friends, as well as someone who we were friends with before separating. Before long, we were all close friends, and I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. We all got along before my old friend and his new girlfriend broke up. My friend ended up quitting social media for a while, so I never really caught his side of the story. Me, his ex-girlfriend, and his friend were all talking in our group chat one day when his ex suddenly began to act strange. She would send really sad or angry quotes that had nothing to do with the conversation, so I decided to DM her. I started talking to her in our side chat, and she just goes off. She begins telling me that she had cancer, and that my old friend that had broke up with her was her light in this dark world. That's seriously how she said it. As I'm talking to her, I start to get more and more creeped out. She told me about her attempts on her own life and that life wasn't worth living anymore. She said that I was lucky to be loved. She told me that she would find out where I lived somehow, so she could prove to me what real love meant. I ended up blocking her after that because it honestly scared me, and my fear was reaffirmed when she began to stalk me. She even began to say that she'd kill me outright. I've since deleted Kik and found a new means of communicating with actual friends. It's been 2 years since that experience, and I hope it never happens again. I was afraid that someone really was going to come after me because I've never encountered someone that talked like that. Someone who acted like they had nothing to lose and was out to get me. Be careful who you talk to. Be even more careful who you let get close. Some people really do need some mental help. Nuggets are important in your life, so keep them close. But even when you think you know someone, they could just turn out to be a psycho. So keep them close at your own risk. You never know who's normal and who's ready for some human nuggets. Good night. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Now, we have come to the end of today's episode, and if you like these stories, then hit the like button, press the notification bell, and subscribe for more spine-tingling content. And we will see you in the next story.